Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, coming to you live. If you're tuning in for the live broadcast, I'm coming to you live through our Facebook page, Patrick King Horsemanship. If you're tuning in after the broadcast, you may be streaming from YouTube or potentially from iTunes. But I'd like to welcome you guys all to episode number 4 of our new Talking About Horses live audio broadcast. Now, our guest today is someone who is no stranger to the competition world, with something like 15 world championship titles to his name and then some. Our guest today, my friend Craig Johnson. We are here to talk a little bit about reining, horsemanship, the state of the industry, and well, gang, you know how it goes. We're going to talk about pretty much whatever comes up. So, Craig, welcome to the show.
Patrick, thank you for having me on.
It's an honor for you to take the time out of your schedule to be here with us for this. And I know lots of folks have been looking forward to it. I'm sure that we've got, our numbers are jumping up already, so we've got quite a few folks already checking in to listen. So fantastic. So Craig, for anybody out there who might be tuning in who does not know who you are, who's maybe not familiar with your street cred, so to speak, in the industry, can you give us a little bit of information about yourself? Who is Craig Johnson?
Well, I'm a guy that grew up on a horse farm in Iowa in the Midwest. My dad was a horse trainer, trained cutting and rope horses, so kind of grew up in the industry. We also had a big farm, and so as a kid growing up, I guess I had the option of either riding the tractor or riding horses, and I picked the horse, and anyway, I'm sure glad I did, but I had a ton of opportunity to practice. We always had 40 or 50 brood mares, which meant there was a whole bunch of colts to start every year. And boy, as a result of the connections that my dad had with AQHA, and he's a lifetime, got a lifetime breeder's award. He's been breeding quarter horses for over 60 years now.
Wow.
And, and so obviously big boots to fill. And, but anyway, I had great opportunities growing up to ride with some of the legends, guys like Ray Hunt and Tom Dorrance. These are guys Dad knew, and when I was a kid growing up, there was just somebody else to ride with. Seemed like the neighbor next door, somebody to ride with. But anyway, so it was a great way to grow up. And the people that I've ridden with over the years since then have just been absolutely spectacular. I don't know the amount of dollars that, in total that they'd have won, but it'd be between 50 and 100 million. I pick out good people to ride with. So it's been quite a journey, from a kid growing up and, to where I am now. But I began with, kind of the all around aspect of horses that, when I was growing up, every horse had to do everything. They had to not only, cut and rein and rope and do pleasure and trail and everything else, but they, we let them in the halter, and it was an all-day deal to take a horse to a show. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I was there for when all the events got specialized. Everything kind of went off in its own specialized direction with the reining and the cutting and pleasure and everything else, to the credit of those disciplines, because as a result, the horses sure got better. We started to breed for that rather than just for 4 legs, long head, and a tail. And, which was awesome. And so my job is a whole lot easier now than it used to be, and yet I feel like I've come full circle in that, I'm getting back into the appreciation of what a horse, other things that a horse can do, allowing them that they may well have a specialty that they're really good at. Let them have their gift, but I think that horses deserve the opportunity to be able to do many things and experience all kinds of opportunities to, learn how to have a little more confidence, how to handle their feet, be a little quieter. So, I'm a big fan of not only the reining now, but, the ranch riding and Western dressage and all those other fun things that can be done on a horse.
Fantastic. Yeah, it looks from your schedule like you've got a lot of things going on multidiscipline wise, which is fantastic. That's great.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I do, which means I'm totally confused now.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I saw you received, am I correct, a world championship in the new cowboy dressage competition, and you've been taking the ranch horse discipline by storm, and still with the reining. What do you see as being the differences in all of those disciplines?
There isn't any.
Awesome.
Really, which is what's so awesome. Everything connects in some way. And I don't care if it's barrel racing and Western pleasure. There's a connection once you figure it out.
Yes.
And it's all about getting in their mind and getting to their feet and teaching their body to do the things it needs to do in order to get that discipline done. And so that's just good general horsemanship. That's just learning how horses work and how they think. But then as I take horses and do different disciplines with them, all I do in order to be competitive is just read the rule book,
Yes.
and realize what they're looking for. I ask the judges, go to a few, figure out what I need to change. And most of the time it's really, the adjustments are pretty simple. All I have to do for the most part is just change where they carry the hood ornament, either
Yes.
up or down,
Yes.
But otherwise it's still about, front end steering wheel and rear motor and brake. It just depends. Yeah. It's just, how you're going to put it together.
Yes, I love that. I love that answer that, it's pretty much all the same. And now you talk about making the adjustments for that discipline or for what that judge might be looking for or something like that. So within that's kind of alluding to the fact that the horses you're riding and the way that you're training is allowing those horses to be quite variable, right, in what they give you as far as tempo and speed and body position and things like that. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that? And I guess that kind of gets us into, sort of what is your training philosophy as it relates to the horses?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question. My training philosophy is pretty simple. It kind of follows the NRHA rule book, which of course is, has been drilled into me for about 40 some years. And it's called A General. And A General says that a reining horse, but let's just call it a horse, is to be willingly guided with no resistance and dictated to completely by the rider. That's a pretty good philosophy, no matter what you do with a horse.
Absolutely. Doesn't matter the costume. That's pretty good.
Yeah, whatever costume. I think it applies to everything. And, I think that's a statement that should be applied to, every single discipline. Before we start out, let's just say that my horse is willingly guided with no resistance and dictated to by me. And, so now what are we going to do with that? And, with that, once I get that on a horse, which, as easy as that sounds, that can take some time.
Yeah, for sure.
That can be a long process. You start where you start and go. But with that in mind, I know what my end result is, those three things. And, and off of that, certainly I can cross train, and I can do some ranch stuff, and I can do some reining things, and I can do some cowboy or Western dressage, and I can, I can rope, and I can go cut, and I can do, whatever. And as a result, the horse gets to have a pretty varied concept or exposure to how to handle themselves. And within that, now I feel actually that I'm a much better horseman than I once was, in that through the cross training, I can allow the horse to be whatever it wants to be. It's their call now, not mine. And, and yet obviously there's still some that want to step up and be a reiner. Now, for me, that's kind of the ultimate goal of all of them, because I found when I was a kid that, every time I took a horse, whether it was a cutting horse or a rope horse or a pleasure horse or whatever it was I was doing with them, when I added the basics of reining, they became better at whatever it was they were good at. It was kind of the common denominator, which is actually why I got into the reining in the first place. I saw it as the common denominator to a horse that was pretty well broke. And, so I see reining more than a discipline. It is how to train a horse, just like you would imagine dressage would be in the English style disciplines for, mostly.
Right.
It's how to train a horse. Dressage itself means horse training, training the horse.
Right.
And so that's how I see reining. It's actually a term for how to train a horse.
Gotcha.
And so I take those concepts and I apply them to the horses and let them be what they want to be. But I learned years ago through, actually, I learned something really incredible from Tom Dorrance, go figure, you know.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody learning anything fantastic there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, oh man, you know, what an opportunity. I mean, what a guy.
Yes.
And people say he was half horse, and I was there. I saw it. He was, you know, but he could see what a horse was thinking, and all we could do was feel, you know, just feel what it was doing wrong.
Right.
So he had all these really incredible back doors to accomplish certain things because he could see whether the problem was mental, physical, or emotional. And I watched him, you know, fix one guy's horse's stop just by teaching it to go over a tarp. You know, now that's pretty creative.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. And because he could see what was the root cause of the problem. So, you know, now my stopping program certainly includes a blue plastic tarp. You know.
Thank goodness for those. What did we ever do to train horses before blue plastic tarps?
I have no idea. Yeah, but it's, you know, it is fascinating. You know, as we grow up, we think we've got it all figured out, you know, but thank God I've gotten older and I realize I'm not so smart in it after all. And, you know, now I can finally learn something.
There we go.
And yeah, but it's, as you know as well, there's a lot of challenges that horses can have along the way. And it doesn't matter whether they're 2 or whether they're 15, you know, there's going to be all kinds of things that come up. And so we just take them as they come. But for the most part, they boil down to 3 different things, 4 if you're really into it. But mental, physical, and emotional is it. And the 4th one is spiritual, you know. And but horses, you know, we've just got to realize that having the appropriate adjustment to the corresponding problem is how you make progress. To have a physical adjustment to a mental problem really isn't helping a horse much.
Yes.
You know? Yeah, that's just trying to cover it up or babysit it or get around it.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we see that so often, though, and I don't know, maybe I'm talking out of turn with this, but I feel like we see it more with the style of training or horsemanship, if we'd even want to call it that at this point, that really focuses discipline first and horse second, right? But
oh, wow, you're so right.
We see it less when we're focused horse first, discipline second. Do you feel the same?
I totally feel the same. And, yeah, I think the disciplines, you know, and it is competitive out there. I'll give it that. You know, I would have to say that it's tougher now than it's ever been, only because there's more horses that can do it now than used to be. And the horses being bred to do it, shoot, you know, a monkey can train half of these things, you know.
Right.
Thank God. You know. Yeah, I'm so glad this is not a game of perfect, you know.
Right.
Anyway, but it's kind of a fascinating thing how we have gotten caught up in styles, and you know, but I've watched them cycle. I've been in it long enough. I've seen styles come and styles go, and yet I realize too that if you want to be competitive, if that's what's winning, you kind of have to fall into that, you know, to some degree, as long as it's not, at least for me, as long as it's not detrimental to the horse or causing undue, you know, stress or problems like that, because I believe in a fair game. And yet, you know, I also know that what's natural for one horse could be completely unnatural for another. For example, how they carry their head and neck. You know, to one, you know, they're carrying their head and neck really low and their nose almost on the ground. Shoot, they were born eating grass, you know, and haven't picked their head up since. And for another one that carries their head way, you know, with more elevation and all that, you know, that's completely natural for them. So if I were to take the grass eater and try to put elevation on him, he'd go, what the heck is that all about? And yet the same thing would apply in reverse to the other horse, you know.
Right, they'd have struggles with it, sure.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the goal is to let the horse be what they are, you know, and use their natural carriages and their natural things, and, you know, and then realize, you know, this one's natural form and natural talents apply in this area, you know, go in that direction, and this one's natural talents apply, go in that direction, and let them be what they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so I would imagine that a philosophy like that is a big piece of what has helped you to become so successful, not only in the reining, but in all the other endeavors that you're tackling. What would you say as a competitor it really takes to reach that sort of success?
Mental toughness, on the part of not only the horse, but the rider as well. You got to be able to draw lines in the sand, and those lines end up all over the arena. I mean, one maneuver does not connect to the next 15,
Right.
You got to move on. And, I've not yet had the perfect run. I couldn't talk to anybody who has, but what they have been able to do is, leave it behind and go continue on. And so that's rider mental toughness, but it's also, not putting so much pressure on the horse that they have to be perfect as well. And I think that's when they reach the highest level, when they realize that they don't have to be perfect either, that we are going to cut them a little bit of slack and they can go ahead and try. I also think that teaching a horse how to handle pressure is actually not a negative thing, but a positive thing. In fact, I've discovered over the years that I believe that we've misunderstood a pretty basic philosophy in horsemanship, which says that to put pressure on the wrong thing and release on the right thing. Now, if I were to follow that concept, there's no way I could have won a world championship.
Right.
Because there's going to be pressure involved. Now, the dilemma in that is if the only time we use pressure is when a horse was doing something wrong, they're going to think that under pressure, something must be wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. And so basically, when a horse is doing something wrong, I just ride out the storm. What I found is that whenever I put pressure on a horse, they're going to do whatever they're doing at the time harder. Now, why would I want them to do the wrong thing harder? I'd rather wait till they're doing it right, put pressure on that, and let them learn how to do that harder.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the pressure says, give me more.
Exactly.
Say you're wrong.
Exactly. It never means they're wrong. And I don't think a horse is ever wrong. They might make a mistake,
Right.
but they're never wrong.
Right.
Yeah, there's always choices to be made. My goal is just to eliminate all as many of the wrong choices as possible and end up with what's right. I consider that a finished horse is one that has mastered the foundation and has learned what not to do. And so they learned what not to do by doing it wrong. But that means that I allowed them that opportunity, and then started offering other things for them to do instead. And I also use the philosophy in order to get a horse pretty competitive that there is no such thing as a correction. And I know that sounds kind of different, or sounds kind of odd, but follow me here.
Mm-hmm.
I make sure that let's call it a correction, any possible correction that I might offer to a horse is first put in them as a maneuver. It's a tool that I can use. When I use a leg in a certain spot on their rib cage, I have first shown them what to do when that leg is applied. And if I lift my hand, I have first gone through the process of showing them what to do when I lift my hand, and how to drive forward, and how to move the hock, and how to lift the shoulder, and whatever that case is. And I put those on as maneuvers. So in my mind, there's more than just 8 maneuvers or 10 maneuvers or 20 maneuvers. There's 500 maneuvers a horse can do. To just stand there and give their chin, that's a maneuver. And so my definition of a maneuver is a move that is made on purpose. So any move that is made on purpose, I taught it to them. And therefore, when something wrong comes up, I just use a different maneuver other than the one they've chosen. All right. So it's not really a correction. It's a move towards something else they already know instead.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And so they never feel like they're wrong. They just choose something else that I have taught them to do.
Yeah.
So I make sure I give myself plenty of tools. They do know what my leg is about and where I put it and how I put it and how, and also the intention that I had behind it, how I used my seat and how I used my weight shifts and whatever in order to communicate to them the response that I wanted. And then I just go get that response. And I also feel that I give them a great deal of confidence in teaching them how to, let's use the word correction. I teach my horses how to be corrected when they don't need one, which again is a little bit interesting to think about. And yet, if you consider that if the only time we offer a correction to a horse is when they need it, they're going to think every time you lay a leg or pick up your hand, they must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, right.
All right. Their brain's already in a twist. If they're at that point where they needed a correction, they've already locked up something. There's a foot going where it shouldn't be, or it's going to the right place too late, or they're braced up in the neck, or something's not moving right, And yet, understanding that those things are going to happen, I put a lot of the adjustments, maneuvers, or corrections, if we wanted to use that word, on at a time when they're fine. So I pick up my hand when I don't need to. I lay the leg when I don't need to. I lift the shoulders when I don't need to, and I drive that hip over there when I don't need to. That's the best time to do it.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Take away a lot of the kind of mental anxiety then, right? That would come with this idea of offering a correction.
Exactly. The anxiety, there isn't any.
Right.
They're fine.
Right.
They're just hooked up. So therefore, they might get 10 adjustments when they don't need them to the one that they do. And when they come across that opportunity where they do need it, they go, oh, that one, and so they don't worry about it.
Right. Okay. So then, rather than, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate this the way it's sounding to me, but it almost sounds like rather than making a correction, you're just asking another question, and then you can kind of get the horses back on track through a game of 20 questions, right? You can kind of come up with the right answer that you're looking for.
You got it. That's how it works.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I love that. And that falls so much in line, I would say, with the theory that I try to teach riders, is that anytime we apply our aids, we're not saying do this or do that. We're saying, what does this mean? Or we're asking, what does this mean to you in this moment?
Right. Exactly.
So very much aligned there. I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And then we'll come up with the right answer.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet I do understand too that, if I apply a leg and they have come up with the wrong answer, they're certainly not going to get the release,
right.
Until right answer shows up. Then they get it, and then they go, oh, okay, I got it figured out now.
Right, right. We just wait for the better answer to come through.
Just wait for the better answer to show up and not get in a panic situation and think you got to come up with the right answer now. Just keep searching. When you come up with it, you'll figure it out, and then also I put my horses through some pretty interesting challenges. In order to be competitive, I realized that I need to cause that highly competitive move that I'm going to ask them to do to be the easy thing. That can't be the hard thing. Otherwise, why would they do that?
Right.
Right. And yet it's kind of fascinating to think about because, I think we've made a mistake on another concept too, which is make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. Well, my God, sometimes the right thing is difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't ever want my horse to think just because it's hard, it's wrong. Right. Sometimes sometimes hard is right. And so I put them through some pretty interesting challenges that they have to figure out with their body, with their feet, with their legs in different positions and, putting effort and trying and stuff like that. So that, as I continue to move up through the progress and up to, getting them to do some pretty high level things, by the time I get there, they think it's easy, So, one of the concepts in reining, as it's described in the rule book, as it goes beyond talking about willingly guided and no resistance and dictated to by the riders, it talks about smoothness, finesse, attitude, quickness, and the authority of performing a maneuver. And certainly I try to follow that no matter what I do with a horse. But then eventually it talks about raising the level of difficulty to make it more pleasing to watch and more exciting to watch. Now, my personal philosophy is to raise the level of easy instead. Because I think that the highest level athlete in any sport that I've watched, whether it's, not only equestrian sports, but, human as well, the highest level athletes make that sport look easy.
Right.
They have gotten to
it wouldn't be pleasing to watch.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yes.
And so I think it's supposed to look spectacular, but it shouldn't look hard.
Right.
If it looks hard, I could have quit training a year ago.
Right. We're doing something wrong.
I didn't. Yeah, exactly. I didn't have to put quite so much time on. So I think, once you get a horse to where they have that basic, understanding of how to do those maneuvers and how to try and how to get their bodies in really interesting positions to be able to accomplish really hard things, that's when they make it look easy.
Yes.
Yeah. That's when they make it look easy with mental focus and effort and try, but total relaxation as well. Because I don't think that it's possible for a horse to do high-level things with tension.
Right.
I think they have to be totally relaxed to do the incredible things.
Yes. Yes. Or at least have no negative tension. Kind of like you're talking, they can handle they can handle a certain amount of pressure, but it would be a positive tension there.
It's a positive pressure. Yeah, they just think, oh boy, we get to do it better now.
Yes.
And and maybe it's I base that on my own philosophy of pressure. It is not a negative thing to me. The bigger the show, the better I am. I just like pressure. I think it's cool. And so I want my horses to have that same concept that this is going to get cool now.
Right.
And so I know the hardest thing for me to do is to go to the smaller weekend shows, and that really aren't that pressure situation. Shoot, I'm easy to beat at a weekend. I'll see you at the World Show though. And I will take your money there.
Right. So you're talking, you'll get them out, get them experienced, just kind of get them seasoned when it really is a low pressure situation.
Exactly right. Yeah, for sure.
And then they can handle the bigger stuff.
Sure. Yeah, it takes that kind of exposure for a horse. Right. They've got to think that that's not a bad deal. They've got to walk in there and go, "Ooh, how about this? I get the arena all to myself, finally."
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And, so they're going to have experienced quite a lot of repetition, of course, in all the things that they do. I like to train not only to the point where they can do it right, but I'd rather train to the point where they can't do it wrong. And because I hate to be lucky, I'd rather be ready instead. And, so I don't count on luck. I just count on, my horse knowing what to do. And so that, that required staying home and getting them rode. And, as much as possible. And, but I also find that, as a result of going out and doing a lot of clinics, it takes me longer to put a horse together because I'm not home as much as it used to be, but I'm sure not worried about it. Now I've got, I used to have really good young horses. Now I got really good older horses. It just takes me longer is all.
Sure. Well, it makes sense with the schedule that you've got and the teaching and that sort of thing. So we're talking about taking horses out and getting them exposed and getting them ready and getting them relaxed and giving them the time and making sure they never feel wrong. But, damn it, Craig, I've got this 2-year-old that I've just got to get to the futurities in 6 months. What the hell am I going to do to cram him in there and get him ready?
Well, my philosophy on that is there's going to be some challenges. There's going to be, but I train on a stair-step method, which means, I'm going to go up 2 steps and down 1, stay there, go up 2, down 1. That's how I raise the level of easy. And so there's no way I can get a horse to the highest level by climbing a mountain. That's too much pressure. And there's no way I can get them there by hugging their neck either. That's not going to get me anywhere. And yet, I do find that each horse as an individual, they're going to be able to accept certain things, and I've got to check it out. All right. So I'm not totally against, challenging a horse reasonably with fairness and assuming that they are at certain levels and they can handle it. I'm certainly not going to run wide open on a 2-year-old down through there and try to ask him to stop 30 feet when he doesn't even know what whoa means yet.
Right.
It certainly has to take its stages. But there are times that I'm going to try to raise the level and they're going to, go through something that is a little bit more difficult than what they're accustomed to in order to figure out what is easier. And yet I also find that, if it weren't for a calendar, I don't know that I'd ever get one ready. But that's just me. And I mentioned that at the clinics, and people go, "Oh, that's just too much pressure for a horse." And I say, "Well, let me ask you this: have you been riding your horse for the last 2 weeks, getting ready for this clinic?" And they said, "Oh, yes."
Right.
Exactly. Well, okay. So you're calendar training too. It's just my calendar is 2 years down the road. You gave yourself a couple weeks. But what's the difference?
Yeah. Right.
As long as I don't make that calendar in 30 days. To say that 2-year-old has to get ready for something incredible. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. All he's got to do is figure out that being rode is okay. My 2-year-olds really aren't doing very much compared to a lot of people's. Mm-hmm. But by the time they get into their 3-year-old year, they're doing way more. Because in the 2-year-old year, they learn how to be rode, how to do different things. They do cross-train, mine track cows. They rope. They go through obstacle courses. They also rein a couple days a week, And so they don't think that it's a bad deal. And yet, as a result of that, it takes them a little longer to get up to a certain stage. But, man, they're happy when they get there.
Absolutely. And, boy, they would have an incredible amount of variety. And, I think about a horse having reference points, right?
Yeah,
right. So when they get into a situation, they have that point of reference to say, oh, that was similar to this,
Exactly. There's so many comparison things that we can do. To teach a horse to run and stop, all you got to do is go track a cow.
Right. Exactly.
The cow did it. They don't blame me for that.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the lead changes. Shoot, they're just an automatic response if you'll go ahead and do your dressage work.
Right.
So they're not under pressure to learn how to change leads. They just have to figure out the exercises that accomplish that. Yep. And I think the high level trainers. We're not high level trainers. I didn't win the world because I can pull harder and kick harder than anybody else. Is because I can break it down more. I realize that little move and, combining 5 or 6 different little subtle moves is what got the big move.
I love that. I love that. And I love the way that you said that. You're not kicking harder or pulling harder. You're breaking it down more. And that right. makes so much sense to me. And I'm sure that's making sense to a lot of our listeners too. Because it's so much about just breaking down those little pieces instead of biting off one giant chunk. You're talking about all the little pieces that come together with that, and that sounds to me like that's going back to your kind of game of 20 questions there, being able to adjust the horse and ask for something a little bit different whenever you decide to throw it in there.
Absolutely right. No, I think that's exactly well put. Just to break it down, for example, for a lope departure, if you're getting the wrong lead, don't try to spur harder or pull harder to, try to, spur him into the correct lead. He's not moving his hip over right. He's not lifting his shoulder right. He's not getting soft in the bridle, or he's not moving off the leg right, or whatever. There's about 10 things that go into getting a really cool lope departure.
Yeah. And there's just a piece of the puzzle that's missing.
There's just a piece missing. That's all there is. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, kind of coming along those lines, and for anybody listening, it was an analogy. I don't have a 2-year-old to get to a futurity. I'd be starting behind the calendar right now anyway, I think. So, so let's take this analogy and take this philosophy. And so I'm an impatient owner, Craig, and I'm sending you my 2-year-old that, by damned, if you're worth your salt, you're going to get him in the show pen. What then?
Well, what then? What then is, of course, the owner, and thank God for owners, but they certainly have a goal. That's why they sent it.
Right.
And yet I do find that sometimes their goals, and I have that visit up front with them. I say, hey, it's an awesome goal. I have the same one. You don't need to put pressure on me. I can do that to myself. However, let's see what the horse thinks about this, and go from there. Yeah. And, and I find that if the horse is, very gifted in that, let's say that they have chosen the discipline of reining. Let's say that the horse has that gift. If he does, it's not going to be hard for him. But if his gift is in some other area, it's going to be next to impossible.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I've never found it to be hard to get one ready for a futurity, even as a young horse, when they are that gifted student, where they are physically, mentally, emotionally focused, whatever. And it's part of their spirit. They were born doing that, and it'd be a disservice not to do it, not to take them. Right. It's not hard for them. Every world champion I ever had, it wasn't hard for them. I just didn't fall off,
Right, because they had,
for the most part, I just had a good seat,
pointed to that
yeah.
anyway.
Exactly. So that wasn't hard for them. And yet we see it happen too many times. And, people get the perception that it's hard on horses. And yet the only ones that it's hard on are the ones that are of perhaps less than spectacular talent, yes. Or even average talent. Those horses, you're trying to make them something they're not, and so I'd have to admit, in my younger days, I tried to do that. I tried to make horses what I thought they needed to be, and I never had it work out, for sure. I never had it work out. And we could get caught up in that trap. And I do understand that, from the trainer's perspective, I've been in this long enough to understand that, whether you've got horses in the barn or whether you don't, generally is dependent upon how you did at the last horse show.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we see a lot of that.
Yeah, unfortunately. And, so if a guy's trying to put shoes on the kids or the grandkids or whatever, sometimes, I get it. I get it. You're going to ask horses to do things, because we got to make a living. And, and so, it's one of those catch-22 things, about the time you go, I think I'm going to give the horses a break. I think I'm going to leave it up to them, and I'm going to, take my time and put the horses together right. And the owner goes, well, okay, if you're not going to get them ready, I'll send them to somebody else.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, one of those tough deals.
Yeah. And that's just kind of that moral crossroads, I guess, that as a trainer
Sure.
we have to come to, right? And that might mean some hungry shoeless kids.
Yeah, exactly. Might have to wear those shoes a little longer.
Right. Little duct tape
Exactly.
will fix that right
Little
up.
macaroni and cheese tonight, because I have my standards.
Yeah, and that's it does become a big challenge that way.
Yeah.
Because you have the responsibilities, right, on both sides of that equation. And sometimes the funds can become really challenging that way.
Oh, sure. We were talking about calendar training and how, for me, I like having a calendar, knowing, I've got horses that aren't even born yet, but I know what night they're going to show in December, if they're a rainer,
Right.
First Saturday in December, first Saturday night in December, they're going to show, and they haven't even been bred yet, and, but that 3-year-old year, and so, we have that calendar. We know when it's supposed to be done. So, as long as you take your time and, do the things, the good ones will end up getting there without any undue stress,
Yes.
And yet I think that, we need to realize that there are just those horses that aren't going to get there, and that's okay. That's okay. And, but if somebody said, well, here, and I've had people do that. They said, I'm going to give you a horse and take however long it takes. How long is it going to take? Because I'm running out of money.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And boy, it's not cheap to train a horse, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
It's not cheap to go get my car fixed either. The part might not cost much, but, paying the guy for knowing where to put it, that's kind of important.
Exactly.
Shoot, I don't know. And so, I believe that it should cost something to get a horse trained. My God, I've put my life into figuring this out, and so that's sure worth something.
Yes.
And, and should be.
Well, and not only have you put your life into it, but you put your life on the line of it every time you try to put that extra pressure on a horse, or even when you don't, because we all know accidents happen,
Accidents happen, right.
But
for sure they do.
To add the extra pressure unnecessarily just doesn't make any sense for anybody involved, really.
It doesn't.
Then you end up with a trainer getting hurt, a horse getting mind blown, and an owner ending up with a mind blown horse that might be, useless after that, potentially.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I think, my philosophy is that I believe that I can help every horse succeed to some degree.
There you go.
I think that, and that certainly is my philosophy. And I don't care if it's just if all he's going to end up being is just a nice recreational riding horse or, a kid's horse. And I say just, but isn't that the highest level?
Yes, right, exactly.
That it's a kid broke horse.
Yeah.
Sure. To me, that's a higher level than a world champion.
A husband broke horse, right?
Good Lord. Yeah, that's a good horse. Yeah, for sure. So, world champions are nice, but kid broke's even better.
Exactly.
Or husband broke, like you said.
Right.
And, every horse has the opportunity to, or should have the opportunity to succeed. And I know there are some programs out there that would appear that it's not their job to help a horse succeed. It's their job to find out if he can fail,
Yeah.
And, that's a tough program. That's a tough program.
Right.
And unfortunately, some horses go through that. And if they fail, it's a long road back.
Yeah.
It's a long road back. And they can come back, but it's a pretty good challenge for them at that point. And, but the one thing I have never seen in all my years of training horses is anybody train wrong on purpose.
Right.
And I have seen some crazy things out there, but they didn't do it wrong on purpose. They did it wrong according to my philosophy or what I've seen or according to, the people that have shown me what to do or my belief system. But, apparently they had a horse that worked on, or somebody showed them that this is what to do. And so they go out and they do that.
Right. They did it with the intent to be helpful.
The intent was helpful. Yeah. In every case. And, and you can see some really nasty stuff out there, but the intent was to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, who was it? I think it's a line from Oprah. And I can't believe that you and I are now talking about Oprah. But anyway, I think it was a line from Oprah where, where she said, if you knew better, you'd do better.
Ooh, there you go. There you go. I like that. And, and there's things that, thank God not everybody had, a video camera in their pocket years ago. They do now. Oh, my God, I can't even put a bridle on without getting that put on YouTube anymore,
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Facebook police and the armchair keyboard horseman.
Oh, for God's sake, it can be taken out of context. And you didn't push his ear forward, Right. Oh, shit, I forgot about that,
Right. He must be an abuser.
Now I'm an abuser, But, but we've all seen it happen. But, the things that I did when I was younger, I didn't do it wrong on purpose, but looking back, I did it wrong. One of the things that I learned from Jack Brainerd, who is now 96,
Wow, 96 now. Holy cow.
Yeah, 96 and still riding a couple a day, and we ride together every now and then, and this guy, he's kind of doing something. He's been riding for like 94 years. So when I do a clinic together with him, I'm pretty excited that we have between us, 140 years of experience.
Right? That's tremendous. Wow.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the thing Jack told me one day, a couple of years ago, he said, if there's any one thing I've learned, there's still so much to learn. And he said that at 94.
Yes.
And we should all be that way. There's still so much to learn.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm so excited that I don't do things the way I used to. Some things I do. It wasn't wrong. Right. I've made some adjustments, but some of the things that I learned from the masters, it's going to be right forever.
Right.
Forever. Right. And people talk about, the old guy, he can't play. Things have changed so much. There's new styles and new this and new training methods. No, there's not. No, there's not. We're not doing anything different than they did years ago. I remember going through, when I do clinics around the world, I like to go see historic things. I'm part of a tourist too. I'm the world's fastest tourist.
I remember reading a post recently that you said something like that. The world's fastest tourist. Yes, that's
me. Yeah, but world's fast. Most of my pictures are taken at 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But anyway, they took me to a library in Sweden to see, a bunch of old books. And in there was a Bible in there that was, well over 1,000 years old in a glass case. And I was amazed by that. It was actually written then. The The book itself was well over 1,000 years old. And they brought out a book, and the lady did, with plastic gloves on, and, I couldn't touch the book, but I guess she assumed because of the hat and boots and spurs that I might be interested in something about horses, Anyway, and it was a horse training book. And, of course, it was in a language that I couldn't understand, but they had amazing pictures. And, of course, back then, they didn't have YouTube and Facebook and, all these DVDs and everything. They had to draw pictures of all these things that they wanted the horse to do. And the pictures were absolutely spectacular, the drawings. What an artist to create, scenes like that, of what a horse was doing. But I looked at that and I thought, oh, my God. We haven't invented a darn thing, because I could tell what they were trying to do, even though I couldn't read the language. Right. I said, you know what? I do that. I'm trying to lift that shoulder and get that collection and push that hip and do that stuff. We haven't come up with a darn thing. The only thing that we have created that is different than it was back then was the purpose. The purpose back then was, it was war. Back then, actually, it was a higher level purpose back then. If your horse was broke, you lived. If it wasn't, you died,
Right. Pretty cut and dry there, ain't it?
Yeah, heck yeah. Hey, you better move your hip over.
No pressure for those trainers.
No, none whatsoever. You better get your hip out of the way.
Right. It's hard to get repeat customers if you don't do your job.
Exactly. There you go. So anyway, but back then, of course, they didn't have reining and cutting and barrel racing and all that other stuff. It was live or die, and so we've taken good general horsemanship and we've taken the danger out of it for the most part. I'll live for the most part. And, but it's, we've created different disciplines, added different things. And, I think that, we're not done creating disciplines either.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, there's things that haven't been created for horses to do yet. And somebody will think of it and it'll become a discipline and it'll get hot and every horse will have to go do that now,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And, so, like the Western dressage or cowboy dressage. Dressage isn't new, but the Western part of it is.
Right.
And, that's not that old, of course, so, now we got something fun to do. And, but when you create something new for a horse to do, you use good, solid training principles that have been there for hundreds of years. And like I said, we're just having fun on horses for the most part, trying to figure things out. Those people, they lived on horses and they fought on horses and they, everything was about horses, and so they were, in my opinion, probably better horsemen than we are now. For sure. And I read the books and the stories, those that actually did put it down in print, of the masters of hundreds of years ago or 100 years ago or whenever they were. And I think, wow, the things they were able to get horses to do, that was just magnificent. Absolutely
and at that
incredible.
point, they weren't necessarily so specialized in their breeding to make those tasks easy.
Boy, they were just riding a horse, 4 legs long, head and a tail.
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth?
Right.
Yeah. And, so I think it is so much easier now that we have created horses that are designed for those disciplines. Like I said, reining is so much easier now than it used to be because 40 years ago we started taking a horse that could, a stud that could stop, breeding it to a mare that could spin, and now baby can stop and spin. Wow, isn't that cool? Yeah. Yeah. And before, when I first got into reining, it was kind of a dumping ground of a place for, pleasure horse too fast, barrel horse too slow. Shoot, now what do we do with it? Well, I guess we'll try and make a reiner out of it. All else fail. All else is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but now it's become, certainly a very highly respected discipline. It's one of the, it's the saddle horn sport of international competition.
Right.
And
yet it's still a fairly young discipline, right?
Oh my God. Guys that, from my opinion, that invented this, some of them, many of them are still alive.
Right.
Right. For sure. So it's a very new discipline in respect to, in comparison to dressage, for sure.
Right.
There's obviously dressage trainers that have passed away, since from hundreds of years ago.
Right.
And
right.
yeah,
A couple of
right.
them. A couple.
Yeah,
of
there's
them.
been a couple of them.
Yeah.
For sure. So this is a new sport, and I think people think, oh my God, the sport has evolved. Just look at the videos from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It wasn't very fancy back then, but I'll tell you what, I was there then. It was fancy.
Right.
Because
at the time.
at the time, that's the horses we had. That's what we knew. That's what we did.
Absolutely.
Yes, it has evolved. The horses have gotten better, and sure, we've come up with, we've learned better body positions to put horses in to get that amazing thing done. And, so for sure there has been an evolution. But it's it was no easier back then than it is now. I promise you that.
Right.
And, and in fact, in ways it was probably harder because we weren't riding that kind of horse.
Absolutely right. At that point, like you said, that the dad could stop, mom could turn around. And now heck, some of these horses are damn near born broke, and they're hunting stops from the time they come out of the womb.
They are, and I think that's that's good from the discipline point of view.
Right.
The discipline has evolved as a result. I think it's bad from a training point of view. In that, there's kids out there that don't know how to teach one to stop. They just run down there, say, "Well, if he was born to do it, he will. If he wasn't, they get a different one."
Yes.
I grew up having to learn how to teach one to stop that didn't want to, and to turn that didn't want to, and so that's information I've got. Just because I had to have it. And, which I find very, very beneficial. And, that may become a lost art, and I don't know if that's good or bad, there's just so much that was learned from the horses that I used to ride.
Right, right. Well, and that kind of brings me into sort of tying together a couple of the questions that I was going to present to you. One of them being, what kind of advice would you be giving for upcoming trainers? And another being, from the training perspective, or from the horseman's perspective right now, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges in the industry for the trainers at this point? So can we kind of meld the two of those together? Because like you said, when it was just beginning, there was a lot more work involved because the horses weren't just naturally talented and freakishly able to do these things. So now we've got trainers who, if they can put a leg on both sides and hold their hand in the middle, they can get half of these horses to do what they want.
Well, for sure. Yeah, we see that a lot. There's guys out there that are winning that aren't really that good.
Right.
And now that's going to end up being controversial. Somebody will send me a message and go, well, I'm not going to name any names,
Right.
But, I think in order to become a high-level trainer, or if you're just starting out, with that goal in mind, I think what you need to first discover is how to get a horse to make it their idea.
Yeah.
Right? Not how to get a horse to make your idea their idea, but how to make that move their idea.
Yes. Which is very, very different.
Whew, boy, that's different. And, excuse me. So, I think to have that move, let's say, for example, a stop, sure, I know what I want it to feel like in the end. But I also know that just because I know what it should feel like, I have no right to punish a horse when it doesn't feel like that. I have no right to do that because he hasn't even figured it out yet. He doesn't know how to use his body yet or how to approach that correctly mentally. So that's going to take some time, so, figuring out how to teach a horse how to make that maneuver their idea, to own the responsibility of it, and to hand you their heart when it comes time to go do that. That's pretty high level training.
Right.
That's pretty high level stuff.
Right.
So look at it from that point. Do you have the right to ask for that yet? Have you earned the right to ask your horse to do that?
Right.
From getting that horse's respect.
To understand and to think at a much deeper level than being just a surface worker, right?
Right. Exactly. And so when I say, have you earned that right, that doesn't mean have you put in the time? Have you learned from who you need to? Are you old enough? What I mean is, have you earned the right to get that response from the horse?
Right.
Did the horse let you have that right? You know, and I've got to say a statement that I make every now and then, and that, good horsemanship is far beyond buckles and ribbons. It is getting into the realm of, did the horse think that you're the winner? You know, we can all look at, the buckle and the ribbon and all that stuff. And of course that is going to keep the barn full. We're not going to fool ourselves there, but yet to me, the highest level compliment that I can get comes from the horse themselves, and that may sound like a canned response, but my God, the older I get, the more I appreciate that, that if the horse can hand me their heart, and make that, and it takes time to get that to happen. But if I can create a situation where that maneuver became their idea, not only their idea, but it was their goal to see how good they could do that, at its highest level. When I put the pressure on, they go, shoot, yeah, I can hand you that. Right. That doesn't seem like a big deal to me, right. Because you've been fair to me up to this point. Apparently this is important to you, therefore it's important to me. So that's when, that's what I'm talking about when you've earned that right, when the horse will, go to that level just because you asked, right. not because you demanded.
Right. Exactly.
And then I also think that, to become a high level trainer, I don't think it's wrong to pick out a discipline, because there's something that is magical about the goal or the effort to master a discipline.
Yes.
I think that's worthy, to master a discipline. I've seen so many people that are, good at general horsemanship, but not really good at any one thing.
Right, sure, yeah.
And not that that's wrong. Yeah. I think that's totally a good thing to be. Mm-hmm. I kind of consider myself in that category now. Where I finally gotten to the level where I feel like, I've attained some certain things in a particular discipline. Now let's go figure out what else I can do.
There you go. Yeah.
But there's a reason they call them disciplines. Because they have a discipline. I talk to people at clinics that, they go, well, you know what? I don't need my horse to, master any particular discipline. I have no discipline in mind. I just want to generally ride. And I go, well, I can tell your horse has no discipline. Right. There's something about it. They call it a discipline for that reason.
Yes.
It gives you and your horse some discipline. Pick one.
Yes. Right.
Yes, you can ride generally, but put your focus on a discipline, and it can be dressage, or it can be cutting, or barrel racing, or what, or reining. It doesn't matter. But the guidelines of that discipline give you a program. It really does, and it gives your horse something to focus on. It tells them when it was right or when it was wrong. Without that, there is no right and wrong. It's just stealing a ride.
Right.
Does that make sense?
There's no direction. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no direction.
If there's not. It's kind of like they say, all roads lead to Rome, but you can't take them all at once.
Exactly right.
You gotta have a focus there. I've had clients tell me very similar things, and so we joke that those are the riders that are undisciplined, right?
Sure.
For exactly the same reason. There's and it's not to say that it's wrong, but if they don't have that sort of goal that they're leaning toward or working toward, then they don't know if they're getting closer to it or not.
Well, that's for sure. They don't know if they're getting closer to it. And I think, the goal of every rider, even if they are recreationally riding, isn't the goal to get a better connection with your horse? Isn't the goal to become just a little bit more of a partner with that horse, to learn more about that horse and how they think and how they feel and how they react? I think that would be the goal of most everybody, even though they generally ride, recreationally. Mm-hmm. And yet, of course, I know people, they just grab a handful of mane, bail on, and wind blowing through their hair, and they're doing the Black Beauty thing. That's fine, too. They don't have any goals whatsoever. Yep. Just don't fall off. And if they do, get back on,
Yep. And if that's their goal, that's great.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it. go for it. And there is something magical about that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
But for me, my goal, and I guess it was just perhaps my upbringing, or maybe it's my own competitive desires. Shoot, I grew up just realizing I had competitive instincts. I tried to play baseball. I'd rather been a professional baseball player. I'll be honest, they make more money.
This is
but
true.
I didn't have it. Yeah, but I didn't have that gift. So dang, what am I going to do with my competitiveness now?
Right.
We'll play football. Well, I wasn't big enough for that.
Right.
Well, maybe I'll run track. Well, I wasn't fast. So so dang everything else I tried.
Process of elimination.
Process of elimination. Exactly. So I ended up on a horse instead. But I still had competitive instincts.
See how that works out.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, thankfully for the whole industry, you've found the niche there, because you've touched a lot of folks, and a lot of horses. You've, I kind of view you as a changer in the industry. As and of course, I'm not deep into the reining industry, but I've seen your influence there. I've seen your influence in a lot of other disciplines, as far as the minds that you have touched in that way. So this is going to kind of pull me into your now presenting, and you've been for a while, presenting reining and your clinics with reining internationally. So talk to us a little bit about that. And I guess one of my questions is, what do you see really as differences in horsemanship as you go around internationally?
Well, at the basic levels, there is no difference. I go to different countries, New Zealand or Australia or anywhere over Europe, and, they ask, well, how do we compare to the United States? I said, well, at the highest levels, you got a ways to go, in the particular discipline of reining. And yet at the beginning levels, everybody's in the same boat. You're making the same mistakes that we're making, over there. We're all just trying to figure this out. And so I don't see any differences, up to a certain level. And yet, one of the differences that I see is that, depending on the country, there's a lot of countries that are stepping up, and creating better horses and buying better horses and getting better horses in, even in dressage. We got competitive over here because we went over there and bought horses. Well, they're getting competitive in reining because they're coming over here and buying horses.
Yes. Right.
And so it's an important thing to be able to tell and assess. And if you're going to play at a high level, then get an athlete that can go do that,
Right.
For sure. You got to get you got to drive the right car, if you're going to go enter the race. And, but what I find, is their background in their horsemanship might vary. I find that in Europe, it's rather military. In Australia, it's rather just go wing it. And shoot, they don't mind getting run off with in Australia. That's just kind of fun.
Right.
Yeah, what the heck? Why pull on him? He'll quit running off at some point, or we'll run out of land.
There you go. Right? Yeah, it's much sooner that they run out of land than we do here, right?
Exactly. Right.
Oh goodness! And those Aussies tend to be a little gamier anyway, right?
Well, they are pretty gamey. Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it's, but it's fun. I just enjoy seeing the different cultures, and how they're, their backgrounds of how they learn and how they came up. I can go to one country and they might not know how to stop a horse, but every single horse changes leads. And I go to another country and they might know how to stop a horse, but they can't get a lead change on a darn thing,
Gotcha.
And, yeah, so it just depends on, the background and the culture and, what they grew up with. And, and I, even within this country, I can go to different parts of the country. In fact, I spent some time back east, a couple years in New York and New Jersey back in there. And it was a fascinating experiment, but I couldn't wait to get back to cows. I'll be honest, back east, they thought my Western saddle, I was just, I was just out there, having fun, trail riding. I wasn't taking riding seriously,
Right.
Yeah. And so it's just a different culture for sure. And yet I learned a lot back there as well. I figured, well, as long as I'm back here, I might as well learn something about dressage. There's some pretty good trainers back here.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah, and so I took the opportunity to learn from there too. And then came back and applied it, in front of a cow. And it worked.
Yep.
And so, there's different styles and different philosophies all around the world, and yet we're all in the same boat. We're all just trying to not fall off and go out and figure something out.
Right. In the end, they're all horses, interestingly enough.
I decided one time, if we're going to get congruent, in what we're talking about, whether it's at a clinic or just amongst ourselves, we might as well make sure that we're clear about definitions. For example, the word broke. I mentioned that to somebody on the street that I've got a broke horse, and they go, well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Right.
Or I've got, or somebody goes, yeah, I've got a horse too. I'm broke too. No, that's not what I meant.
Exactly. Yeah. But isn't that the truth?
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Yeah. So, so for me, I guess I just grew up in a culture where if I had a broke horse, if somebody came up, said, wow, your horse is broke, I'd go, thank you. That's the highest level compliment you could give me.
Yes.
And yet so let's get clear on the term, what broke means to me. All right. But, as a result of that, I decided to look up a horse in the dictionary. And in Webster's dictionary, it said 4 legs, long head, and a tail. Well, shoot, we're all on one of those. It comes in different sizes and versions and breeds and bloodlines and all that, but we're all riding that,
right.
And what we do with it is kind of our choice. It's kind of our goal. And, we also got to realize that when we step on, it is our goal. It's our goal. And, however you feel about that, whether you're going to go be high level competitive or just recreationally riding, when you step on, that was your goal to get from where you are to where you're going to get to on your horse, even if it's just, across the creek to the other side and back. That was your goal, not the horse's goal.
Right.
Their goal was to, eat my food, eat my grass, mess up my stall and give me a whole lot of work to do. That was their goal when they woke up.
Right.
So to go to the reining futurity, or to get across the creek, we got to realize that's our goal,
Yeah.
But isn't it awesome? Isn't it absolutely amazing that some horses will hand you enough of their heart to let you go have that goal?
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Isn't that amazing that they'll do that for us?
And be so forgiving, most of them, along the way.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah. Thank God they have a sense of humor.
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Because I'll make more mistakes than I do the right thing, even today. But I can do the wrong thing a few days in a row and then come up with the right thing, and they go, okay, thank God you figured that out.
Right. There you are. We've been waiting.
Yeah, I've been waiting for it,
Yeah.
Yeah, but they are so good about that. So good about that.
Absolutely.
And yet, I do find it fascinating, that I could, for example, train a horse to what I know. And, admittedly, I've learned from some masters and a lot of good horses, and I know some things, about how to put a horse together. And I can do what I would consider, from my perspective, to do the right thing every day on a horse for the next 3 years. All right? And he might learn how to do right things, for sure. But I put somebody up there, and he rides them all wrong, doing the wrong thing, doing this and that for 1 week. And guess what? Now I spend the rest of my time trying to do with my horse.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Teaching him how not to do it wrong again. How is it that they learn the wrong thing so much quicker than they learn the right thing?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, which brings up, I have not had the nerve to try this theory yet, but what if I did it wrong every day for 3 years and then just did it right for a week? I wonder if it would work.
You might be onto something there, Chris.
Maybe they just do it right and be so stubborn about it that
That's it. Yeah, they would do it right stubbornly, and you'd never get that fixed.
Exactly. Never get that fixed.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, you might be onto something there. I think I can
Yeah.
understand why you don't want to try that, and I sure don't. But maybe we can find some young buck that's not.
Maybe
not
there you
opposed
go.
to that
I
idea.
get an assistant to try that, but I'd hate to watch it.
Right, right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but it might
What
work.
an idea. What an idea. Well, folks, you heard it here first. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, that'll be my next clinic. You know,
That's it.
oftentimes I get them doing things at clinic, and I go, that might work. I think I'll try it at home.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. That's awesome. That's awesome. So,
Yeah.
so speaking of clinics,
Mhm.
you and I had an opportunity to teach together. Oh, gosh, I don't even remember how long ago it was now. 6 years ago, I think now it was,
Mhm.
in Pennsylvania, and you were sharing with me a story about riding with both Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt in a clinic.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I remember the story correctly, it was the last clinic Tom Dorrance taught.
It was.
And
Yep.
it's funny because you told me the story. We were just kind of hanging out after the clinic at a bar, enjoying a beer and sharing stories. And you told me this story about Tom and asking him about a turnaround challenge that you had. And that story has hung on with me. Do you remember the story that I'm
I do. I remember it clearly.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Would you mind sharing that with all of our listeners? Because it was just such a fantastic story to me.
Well, I had the opportunity to sit in a golf cart with Tom Dorrance and visit about horses. I mean, what luck. And so as a kid, I was probably in my 20s or something at the time, sitting in that golf cart with, the master.
Yeah.
And so I had the chance to ask him some questions. And one of the questions that I ask is, let's assume that I'm working this horse on a turn, and I don't like where he's putting his feet, and, he's got this and that, or he's moving his hind end around and he's not doing the right thing with his front end. I said, is that a front end problem or a back end problem? If he's doing it incorrectly. And Tom said, well, have you ever seen one of those magic eye pictures that are blue and green and purple and orange and all these different colors, and you look at that picture and you can't make any sense out of it, but you look at it for a little while longer and all of a sudden a sailboat comes out of that picture? And I said, yes, Tom, I have seen one of those pictures. And that was it. That was his answer, and I thought, oh my God, and so for the next 30 years, I'm still trying to figure out what the heck he was trying to tell me.
Right, still trying to see that sailboat.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, and but that was his answer. But he taught that way. He wanted you to figure out the answer. That was his style of teaching. Yeah. He very seldom gave you the exact answer. He'd set up a situation or give you some kind of an analogy like that. And so, and in fact, for those listeners who have ever written the book or read the book, True Unity, if you're as confused as I am, it's okay.
Right.
I have not figured it out yet either. But every now and then I'll read it again and I go, whoa, now I get it. Or at least that sentence. And so he was that deep.
Yes.
And yet, I asked that very same question about 2 weeks later of Ray Hunt. I said, suppose the horse is doing this with the front end and that with the back end, and, is it a front end or a back end problem? And Ray said, what the hell are you letting him get out of alignment for in the first place? So they taught very differently. But,
yes.
but weren't they both right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, they were both absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of fascinating, but what an opportunity to visit with those two guys and spend some time with them.
Sure.
I only wish that I'd had the opportunity, like some other great horsemen that we know, that not only went to the clinic and did a colt start clinic with them, or actually went and rode with them.
Right.
Worked for them and did those.
Right.
There's guys out there that did that.
Right.
Oh man, do I wish I was one of those guys. But at least I was smart enough to listen at the clinic when they were teaching and when they were talking, and I got the notebook, and to this day, and I know those clinics were years ago, but there's nothing that's gone out of date. Every now and then something comes across, and I'll remember something that Tom said or something that Ray said, and it just totally changes things. It's just that perspective that I needed.
Yes.
And, I go to a couple of clinics a year myself because I figure that, I hope my doctor goes to to continuing education, for
Right?
God's sake.
Exactly.
He's getting old now, and I hope he didn't quit back, 40 years ago learning.
Right.
So I figure I owe it to the students when I go out and that I stay on top of things, that I keep up, and I owe it to the horses as well, but one of the clinics that I enjoy going to is, I think it's called the Legends Clinic or Legends something that Buck Brenneman does down in Fort Worth.
Okay, the Legacy of Legends. Yeah.
Legacy of Legends.
Yes.
Yep. And the reason I go to that one is it is my revisit of Tom and Ray.
Yes.
Because that's what it's about. That's the things they said and the people that he gathered. They spent time with those guys, and I sit there and I think, wow, that's the reminder I needed. I for some reason I just slipped off into forgetting about that.
Right.
And so I go for my annual reminder to that. I don't even think they know I go. I go buy the ticket and sit in the stands. I don't. But I'm there and taking notes, and it's just so cool.
Yeah,
it's just so
cool. It kind of puts the train back on the track.
Yeah, exactly what it does. And when you and I did that clinic together ourselves, when you were teaching, I was a student. I promise you that, because I learned so much from the things that you were talking about.
And likewise, and that's so important. That is so important, and that's a big reason why I started this broadcast. To be honest with you, is to get the collaboration of all of us in here, kind of sharing these ideas and revisiting those past experiences. Because just like you, I was very, very fortunate. I had the opportunity to live with Ray Hunt for a couple months.
Wow.
In kind of an apprenticeship deal.
Yeah.
And there are still days where I'll be working with a horse and I'll say, oh man, that's what Ray meant when he said this, that, or the other thing. And then, by damned if it isn't another year or 2 years later when I say, no, you dummy, that wasn't it. This is what he meant.
That's what he meant, yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
No, true enough.
Yeah,
and
it's so important. Like you said, you hope your doctor goes for continuing education. It's really important that we do the same thing.
Well, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I remember the clinic that you and I did together. It wasn't just the two of us either.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. There was somebody else there, and I remember sitting next to you when he was teaching.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was you and I and Eitan Bet Halakmi.
Exactly.
And also Mark Russell. Yes.
Exactly right.
And
Wasn't that a
it's
funny
so
minute?
funny because I still talk about that clinic. And I say, to date, that was probably the most fun, the most engaging. It was such a small potatoes deal. What was there, half a dozen people in the stands?
That's it. I can't believe it.
So ridiculously poorly attended. But I tell everybody, I would have paid to watch that what I was paid to teach at that.
Isn't that the truth?
That was so amazing. That was an incredible experience.
Yeah, it was just a spectacular experience.
Yeah.
To go, to go watch those guys and to watch you too. It was, I got so many ideas out of that clinic.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
The way that it all gelled together, every piece just built on the last piece. It seemed like there was zero conflict in philosophy at all with all of that. Every piece, it was like peeling away the layers. It was tremendous. Tremendous.
Well, what was so fascinating to me, and I totally agree, that we did discover the thing that we talked about earlier, as you and I were talking just now, that there really aren't that many differences. There's more similarities than differences in whatever we do with a horse.
Right.
It is all about moving the feet, and it couldn't have been, in my opinion, four guys doing four more totally different things.
Right.
And yet weren't we teaching exactly the same things?
Exactly
the same things.
Yeah.
In the end, it was all about how do you think about a horse? How do you get those feet to do that? How do you get the body to do that? And what position you're going to get a horse in to do that? And how are you going to make that their idea?
Yes.
We were all on the same page there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. It's interesting. I find And I probably overshare with this sometimes because I say it so many times, but I find that, at the very basic beginning of a horse's education, it's all the same.
Yeah.
At the highest of a horse's education, no matter the discipline, it's all the same. It's in the middle, and it's a lot of the folks that kind of get stuck in the middle.
Right.
And it's all egos and bullshit.
Isn't that the truth? That is so true.
Because really, from start to finish, it's all the same. You got to get the mind right. You got to get the feet right. You got to get the body right.
Right. Yeah. So true. Yeah. I for a little while I kind of studied martial arts, and the reason I did that is because I wanted to be able to put my boots on without sitting down again.
Maybe I should start.
Anyway, so it was good for stretching and balance. And yet, as I studied it, I discovered that, it's in the middle where we get caught up in, got to have this belt, got to be able to make that move, got to be able to kick that guy there and, and do this. Yeah. And then in the end, it's like, so.
Right? Exactly.
We learn how to fight so that in the end, we don't care whether we fight or not.
Right.
Yeah. And, so I think horsemanship is the same way, and that's why people ask me, "Oh my God, have you quit? Have you decided not to compete again? Why? Why? Because it doesn't matter to me anymore.
Right.
It just doesn't. But however, when I do go, I find it so much more relaxing than it used to be.
Yes.
So much more relaxing than it used to be, which is fascinating because now my horses are doing so much more than they ever have. Because I think, how many times have we, as we're growing up, especially if you're competitive, go in and drive your horse absolutely crazy because not only do you want to win, you just want to destroy the competition. Well, that usually doesn't end up well.
Right. Exactly.
The horse felt that one. The horse goes, okay, this isn't fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to get even with you.
Yep.
And they do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I read you had made a post a while back. It's going to make me seem like a stalker now, but I remember you writing something about basically somebody asking, "Oh, are you retired now?" Craig Johnson. Right. He's just kind of a retired has-been. You're not doing it anymore, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, you went into it more and you expanded on it more in your post, and I'm just kind of touching on the surface of it right now. But your answer, I thought, was phenomenal. I'll see you in the show pen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about that is, that I've evolved.
Yes.
I haven't retired. I've evolved.
Right.
And that evolution has caused me to realize that some horses can and some can't. But when I get one that can, I'll come take your money.
Yeah.
I got no problem with that. So it's no, I haven't retired,
right.
But I have learned a whole lot.
Yeah.
I've figured out, that for me personally, it is more about the horse than it is about me now. And yet, if I have a horse that says, look, let's start running because I really want to do this. Let's start seeing how hard we can do this because this is just fun. Mm-hmm. I was born to do this. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Quit going slow if you don't mind. I got more things in mind than that.
Right.
And I go, hey, fine, you're the one.
Yep.
All right. Yep. So, and yet I'd still go out and I do, spectacular things with horses that are somewhat different than what people would expect. I do go do the Western dressage now and the cowboy dressage, and
mm-hmm.
I've marked 84s and 85s, in cowboy dressage. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that doesn't make the cover of the Rainer magazine, but
right.
However, I'm personally excited about it.
Yes.
Or I go in the world in ranch riding. Again, it didn't make the cover of the Quarter Horse News, but I'm personally excited about it. Because it was something different, and I found a horse that's what they wanted to do, and they put up their hand and they said, that's where I want to go play. And I go, okay, lucky for you, I like to go play too.
Absolutely.
So let's go there.
Yeah.
And, so I don't think, in my opinion, using Jack Brainerd as an example, I think once you are a horseman, there is no such thing as retirement.
Right. Exactly.
There isn't. They're going to have to pull my boots off,
Right.
because that's just something that you were born with and I was born with. And, the guys that are really good at it, we just can't help but do that, And the fascinating thing, and to some degree, I think it's almost a shame when, our body can't quite do the things that we have now learned.
Right.
Isn't that the truth?
Sure.
We have. I wish I'd have known then what I know now, but who doesn't say that?
Exactly.
For crying out loud.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's a standard answer, but it is so true. I remember reading a story in a book about horsemanship, and it was about the master trainer in Japan. He was Japan's highest level trainer. Nobody could do things with horses that this man could get done. He was famous around the country, and on his deathbed, and he was 100 years old at that time. His son was saying, "Oh, of all the things you've done and the people you've taught, and the magnificent things you've done with horses, and here you are at 100 on your deathbed. Is there anything, that you'd like to say?" And he said, "What a shame to die now." And he said, "Oh, what do you mean, what a shame to die now?" He said, "I'm just now figuring it out."
Yep.
And how true a statement is that?
Absolutely.
I'm just now figuring it out.
Absolutely. And it's funny because that's something that Ray used to say to us all the time. He'd say, you're probably going to get there before I do. And when you do, you need to come back and tell me what I'm missing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, what a statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that amazing?
Absolutely. And another interesting thing, this is kind of bringing back memories of riding with Ray now. Another interesting thing that he said to us, he said, we've got all these people talking about, it takes feel, timing, and balance to get all these things right with a horse. And Ray says, and there's one other thing that makes it all work. And I remember leaning forward on my saddle horn like, oh my gosh, guys, here it is. Ray's going to give us the secret. We're going to be the greatest horseman the planet has ever seen because Ray is giving us this final secret, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the key to life.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And he said it was so much like a key to life City Slickers kind of moment, right?
Yeah.
Because he says it's feel, timing, balance, and there's one other thing that makes it all work, and we're leaning forward on the saddle horns, and our eyes are huge, and our mouths, I'm sure, are all gaping open at this moment. And he says, and I haven't quite figured that one out yet.
That is awesome.
I remember we spent
City
that
Slickers all over
night,
again.
it was the five of us, we spent that night in the bunkhouse so upset. We kept saying, screw it, we're just going to go be greeters at Walmart for the rest of our lives.
Right, because even he can't figure it out.
Right, if Ray Hunt can't figure this out, we don't have a shot at getting it right.
Yeah.
We're done now.
Might as well give it up.
Right, exactly.
But I do understand. I'm old enough now to understand exactly what he meant.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's same thing, like you were saying, it's what a shame to give up now, absolutely. So, okay, well, if you don't mind, Craig, we have a couple questions that have popped in from our live listeners, and I'd like to run through them quickly here if we can, if you don't mind.
Great, let's go.
Okay, cool. So, let's see, where did they all go? Okay, so Robin wants to know, even though you have a specific focused discipline, do you still cross-train?
Of course. Yeah, cross-training is how I get to the highest levels of a particular discipline.
Yes.
I think you can focus too much on a discipline and puts too much pressure mentally, physically, and emotionally on a horse. They need to have game days where they're doing anything but what their chosen discipline is. And so, on my place, people drive in, they go, I thought you trained reiners. What's this, spectacular obstacle course for? And I go, it's because I train reiners.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and, I see you've got, you rope and you do all this other stuff. What is it? It's because I train reiners. Because I understand how horses think. There's those back doors that Tom Dorrance demonstrated to me. the back doors. The reason the blue plastic tarp teaches a horse to stop is not magical once you figure out how horses think.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yes, the cross training is going to help me to discover where a horse's gifts lie, but it is also going to help me to take the horse's gifts and maximize them.
Yeah. Perfect. Exactly.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. And I kind of knew that was going to be your answer, so I love being right. Hey, what can I say?
Hey, how about that? Well, then you can answer the next one. Yeah.
Oh goodness. I don't know about that. So Peggy wants to know, how do you help a nervous horse to focus and relax?
I sell him. No, I'm kidding.
Well, that'll do it, right? That gets rid of that problem.
That helps. That's the quickest way around it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's going to take a little time.
Yeah. There we go. And we've got that futurity in 6 months we got to get to.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. So, the easiest thing is just sell him.
Get one that's not so nervous.
Yeah, exactly. Buy one that's not nervous. But there's there are obviously some things that you can do to cause a horse to not be so nervous, and exposure is one of those things.
Yes.
They're nervous because it is something they are unaccustomed to experiencing, for the most part. So they're feeling that pressure is the flight response, the fight response, or whatever. They're just using a natural instinct in a situation that seems uncomfortable to them.
Yes.
For sure.
Right.
And so I find whatever I'm at the effect of, I need to become the cause of. So if I'm at the effect of my horse being nervous because we're dragging a rope, then I'm going to drag that rope a lot. It's like, okay, get used to it. We're either going to get used to this rope or we're going to run out of land, one or the other,
You hope you're in Australia when that happens.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Maybe Tasmania. Tasmania would be even better.
Exactly. I think, you just need to get some exposure, and certainly within reason. I don't believe in attacking a horse, for example, with a flag. I'm not going to come up there and I'm not going to wave that at him, and I'm not going to beat him up with his flag until he can just stand there and take it. Right. I'm going to just, and I'm not going to be sneaky with it either. Right. But I'm going to approach him with it and take it away, and then I'll approach him a little more. I'm never going to hit him with it, but eventually, over the course of a few days, I can wave that flag at him pretty hard, and he'll go, flag.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Matter of fact, without being aggressive.
A matter of fact, without being aggressive, but I'm not going to start with being aggressive. Otherwise, it's like, okay, why create a wreck that you didn't need to,
Right.
Yeah. And so there's going to be those things, and there's going to be, exposure to, other situations and horses and cows and whatever the case might be. And yet realizing that all horses are different. Some horses are just wired to being a little nervous. Others are wired to being just, nothing bothers them. There's internal horses, there's external horses, there's, if you believe in it, there's right brain and left brain, and, what the heck, So if you've determined that your particular discipline is going to require, a particular mindset on a horse, if you haven't got that mindset, then my first answer is not wrong,
Right.
Get a different one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not suited for what you're trying to do, then it's more fair to you and to that horse for him to kind of find a new zip code and for you to find a new mount. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I'm going to cut on a horse, I don't need one that, if I'm going to do cutting, I need to have one that's a bit of a bird dog.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Because, but if I'm going to go do trail riding or whatever, I don't need one spooking at every little thing that moves,
Right.
And so, just determining what I'm going to do with that horse. Yet realizing there are things that I can do to cause an external horse to become a little more internal.
Yep.
There's things I can do to cause an internal horse to become a little more external, but they are what they are.
They are what they are. Absolutely. I was auditing a clinic, year before last now, I guess maybe, with Charles DeCunfee, dressage legend, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
There were no other auditors that showed up for 2 of the days, so it was just he and I sitting together, and it was fantastic. But he was presenting, he was teaching a lesson, and I forget exactly what the challenge was, and his comment was, Well, that's just the person that horse is.
Wow. Great statement.
Yeah. And so I steal it. I won't lie. I've stolen it.
Oh,
and
of
I
course.
use it all the time.
Well, after 2 weeks, yeah, it's your idea anyway.
Absolutely.
But I admire that you still give him credit.
Yeah, well, sure. And you know,
you're
I
a
give
big
you
guy.
credit all the time too, over quite a few different things. But one in particular, that clinic that you and I presented at together, you were working with, I don't remember what horse you were riding, but you were riding somebody's horse at the time, and I believe you were working on your wagon wheel drill.
Okay.
And the horse found it to be particularly challenging. And you said over the microphone, "Oh, you think that's hard? Try this."
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And I use that all the time. And I tell people all the time. I tell all of my dressage clients, look, there's this reining dude who can really teach you a lot about dressage. You know, you think that's hard? Try this. You know, and basically the philosophy was exactly what we talked about at the beginning of this talk. Is, you know, you presented more questions, right? So that the horse became more ready for what you were asking.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Awesome.
You know, occasionally I do the cowboy dressage clinics too, you know, and, you know, which I find incredibly fun. And people go, oh my God, how do you get those horses to do that 10-meter circle so well? Because I showed them how to do a 6-meter.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
You know,
the 10-meter became easy.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, if you think that's difficult, try this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Fantastic. Okay, so another question coming in here from Chi-Chi, and she's actually presented 2 questions, the second of which was one of mine, and she worded it better. So, but the first question she has, are there any particular clinicians or up-and-coming cowboys and cowgirls that you like to do clinics with or enjoy watching because of their insight?
You know, here we are on the broadcast, so a good answer would be you. You know,
brownie points aren't going to get you anything now.
There you go. Yeah, I want to be back on again. You know, but there's, there's guys that I've had the opportunity to do clinics with. For example, Martin Black. You know, I had a chance to do one with him, and wow, what a treat that was. You know, that guy, that guy's so good. Yeah, but then I've done a number of clinics with Pat Pirelli. You know, what a fascinating experience that is too. You know, everybody's got different ideas and different things to do, and then, you know, I've done clinics with masters within disciplines, you know, even the reiners. You know, I've done clinics with, guys from the past like Bill Horn and Bob Loomis, but, you know, guys, of current that are very, very good. And, so everybody, I just find that if those people are committed to the horse and doing it right, and and playing the game that is fair, and those are people that I just enjoy spending time with, and and plus, I find it very interesting to me to do clinics with guys that are just funny. Might as well be funny. I might as well be entertained while I'm there.
You may as well enjoy it. Sure.
Yeah, heck yeah. So I like doing clinics with guys that have great stories. Yeah, but yet, don't the people enjoy that as well?
Right.
Yeah, but there's, in fact, we're in the process of working out doing clinics with Craig Cameron and people like that, and I've done a couple of things even with Chris Cox, and shoot anybody. Heck, I'm that guy. I'll ride with anybody. I don't care who they are, and. Because though I enjoy doing the clinic with them, I'm just like what you were talking about. You and I were at the clinic that we did together. I'm there as a student as well. So I like doing clinics with guys that I'd really like to learn something from.
Yes.
I'm selfish that way.
Sure. No, I feel the same way. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you see me doing a clinic with somebody, it's because I want to learn from that guy.
Yep.
I had Tom Hagwood came down, and I actually brought him in and did a clinic. Together at the ranch last year.
Yes.
And,
that was in the fall,
Tom Hag.
What's that? That was in the fall, wasn't it? Fall or early
It
winter?
Was. Yeah. And for those who don't know who Tom Hagwood is, get out a little more. But he has won the Mustang Million. He's the only one that has won that Mustang Million. They only had the one. And yet, he's won several of the other high-level challenges, on Mustangs, which is a very, very difficult thing to do,
yes.
And he's kind of been the guy year after year after year, and there's a lot of other people that are good at it, but he's consistently, at the top end of it. And so I brought him down to figure out what the heck he's doing. I brought him down to learn,
Yep.
but but what a fun guy to do a clinic with. Oh man, it was just awesome. And to figure out how to get to a horse's heart and get to their mind and get to their feet. I think I'm short of time if I take 2 or 3 years. Those guys get 90 days.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's just amazing how they go about it.
Yes.
And so there's so many good people to learn from out there. But there's really nobody I wouldn't go do a clinic with. I'll be honest with you. I've done police training clinics. I remember one time. Guy McLean, I've become good friends with him, and Dan James and those guys. And now one thing I have no intention of doing is, standing up and Roman riding on horses or turning around and riding bareback bridleless on a horse and go run and stop. Forget it. You guys go do that.
Right.
But, but what an opportunity to do things with them and learn from them. And in fact, Guy and I Dan James and I are doing a clinic next month in Kentucky. Nice. I am so excited about it.
Nice.
Yeah, that we're going to do this thing at his place there in Lexington. And, man, I'm just so excited about whatever we're going to do. And I'm there to wing it, Yep. I'm sure we'll talk about reining and some of the ranch stuff, but heck, he'll probably lay horses down and we'll stand on top of horse. Well, he will. I doubt if I would. Shoot, I gave that up a long time ago.
Right,
but,
right.
But what a fun opportunity to go combine entertainment and competitive goals.
Exactly.
He slants his toward entertainment and fascinating things that you can do with horses, and even some tricks. And yet this guy's getting pretty competitive in the reining as well. And certainly within the freestyle, he's kind of the man right now. And because who else would have thought of that? And the things that he does on horses. So, I'm very excited about that upcoming clinic with him.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. In fact, I believe you were somewhere coaching Dan, and a student of mine was there competing, and I said, Eddie, you've got to go ask Craig about Tom Dorrance's sailboat.
Yeah, ask about the sailboat. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. And it's, really, I mean, again, it goes down to the whole reason why I started this broadcast. It's so much about the collaboration of all of this. Because, like we said, it's all the same, right? We're all working with the horse. We're all trying to get the most we can out of ourselves and our horses and our students. And to be able to connect everybody like this collaboration is, I think, is at some point going to become paramount for the forward movement of the industry.
Well, for sure. I think so too. And I think collaboration is going to just end up, completely how we're going to learn.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And collaboration isn't just, watching RFD TV and the next guy that comes on.
Right.
It's actually going to those events where there's other people, like the horse fairs are absolutely spectacular.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love going to those horse fairs and being one of the presenters. But man, as soon as my session is done, you're not going to catch me at the booth. I'm over there watching the other guy.
Right. Exactly. I get yelled at for that all the time. Where were you?
I know.
Where were you? And I say the same thing every time. I say, well, damn it, I want to go watch this guy, and then I get so upset because the one person I want to watch, the really bad, is always presenting at the same time I am.
Yeah. Oh, and I hate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's guys, for one of the last horse fairs I went to, I've seen the guy before, Van Hargis,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I cannot wait to do a clinic with that guy. I sat there and watched him. I thought, oh my God, I could have fun with him.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Or Martin Black or whoever, and it's just so spectacular to watch those guys and the things they're getting done. And and just a different way of presenting it.
Yes.
Exactly. I go there, if nothing else, to, maybe I didn't learn something new about a horse, but I learned some really cool phrase that I'll give them credit for a little while.
Exactly. I won't lie.
Yeah.
I've been writing down a number of the things that you've been saying, and that is so true also, for a lot of us, going to those events, going to the expos and the horse fairs, is probably the only time throughout the year, or throughout the decade, heaven knows, that any of us are actually going to be able to cross paths.
Right.
You know, because
So
we're
true.
always doing our own thing, you know? So those are fantastic. And actually, at some point this year, I'm just going to put in a little plug for this now. At some point this year, I'm going to have one of the managers of one of the bigger expos in the United States on here talking about what it takes to get all of us together and put on an expo like that.
Wow.
Which I think is going to be pretty cool.
That's going to be so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm doing the equine fair out in Massachusetts this year too.
Okay.
And you know, whenever they ask, I say, yeah, I'll come. I don't care what else is going on. You know, I'll basically step off the horse at the AQHA World Show and get on an airplane and go there. But I'm excited about it. You know, because I don't care who else is presenting there. You know, but I'm going to have to hire somebody to sit at the booth because I won't be there. You know.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah, I'll be watching.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so let's see. The last question that we're going to take from our audience today, from our listeners, is going to be from Chi-Chi, and we're going to take it because it is my question phrased better. So thank you for that, Chi-Chi. So what she asks is, of all the horses that you've ridden, which one most impressed you, or with whom did you have a truly special partnership?
The next one.
I love it. Perfect answer right there. Perfect answer.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I think every horse that I've stepped on up till now has got me ready for the next one that I'm going to get on. You know, and they were all different. You know, I've ridden thousands of horses, never two the same. So my answer would, you know, if I had to name horses that I have been on in the past, you'd have to have a way more specific answer or question than that. Yeah. You know, way more specific. You know, who had the best attitude? Who was the most physical? Who was, you know, the fastest or the best stopper or the, you know, whatever. You know, there'd be so many different answers. But I am so lucky that I have been in this long enough, and I've had customers that were great enough, and you know, for whatever reasons, I have more than just that one horse in a lifetime.
That's awesome.
I could fill a barn with that one horse in a lifetime. I really could. Awesome. But the next one, you know, who knows how amazing that horse could be.
If you haven't already written that post or that article yet, that's got to be an upcoming one. Because, boy, that's a lot right there. I love that. That is the perfect answer to me. That's awesome. And now Chi-Chi's trying to get a little deeper with her question, and we're not going to let her do it. She's just going to have to wait.
Well, Chi-Chi's just confused. That's all she is.
That's it. She's trying to get a little deeper. She's just going to have to wait until you and I do this again, and she's going to have to save her questions because I said this was the last question. Now, there's no good that's going to come out of being greedy. I'm just going to put this across to our listeners right now. There's no good that's going to come from being greedy.
That's right.
I'm presenting you with the best horsemen and thought leaders in the industry. And when I say it's the last question, it's the last question.
There you go. All right. We got to draw a line here.
That's right. We draw our line. So, okay. So now it's back to my questions. And we're going to do some follow-up or some kind of grand finale questions right here. So let's see. If there was one specific thing that you could recommend for riders to focus on as a primary means of improving their horsemanship, what would that be?
Don't fall off.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. Don't fall off.
That's good. I love it.
Boy, does that take in quite a bit, you know?
Well, perfect. And that brings us, oh God, I hope we get a different answer here. But, you know, if we don't, that's cool too. So next question. Go back in time 20 years.
Yeah.
What advice are you going to give to 20-year younger Craig Johnson?
Ooh, don't fall off. Because I fell off a lot.
Did you fall off a lot 20 years ago?
Oh, gee, I was always on the ground. Yeah. So that's why I can say don't fall off.
There you go.
Speak from experience. But, you know, the advice I would give is learn more from the masters. Who isn't of the mindset? It seems so popular right now to learn from the new hot guy, the young guy that's out there that just won the big event.
Absolutely.
And and he's got something to share too.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong.
Right.
He's obviously got something to share. But it's incredibly disappointing when a master shows up and nobody comes to watch.
Exactly.
You are so wrong. So wrong. To miss that.
Yeah.
And I think you and I grew up in a different time. We did go learn from the masters. Tom and Ray were important to go see.
Right.
And I hate to say it, but thank God they're not around now, because I doubt if anybody'd go.
Yeah. Well, yeah. My goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a shame that would be.
Yeah.
So learn from the masters. Go get something from that. The guy that you think is done. He's forgot so much.
Right. He's forgotten more than we know.
Go remind him. He's forgotten more than you'll ever know.
Yep.
So go ask him what he's forgot. Ask him that question. What have you forgotten, and make him remember.
Yeah.
So learn from the masters and respect them for what they've done and what they've been through. For sure. And so do that, and then also give a horse a break. We've all got competitive instincts. There's nothing wrong with wanting to win. I'm that guy too, but man, the horse is part of this game too. And, so let them help you go win. Don't force them to win, set it up so that it's their idea. And someday when the horse hands you his heart, it ends up, that you do get the buckle, that you do win that, go become $1 million rider. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Go for it, for sure. But do it right.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's going to put me into the next question then. If you could go ride with anyone, past or present, specifically, who would it be and why?
Well, the present, I would go, and I get that chance. I go ride with Jack Brainerd. Why? Because he's 96.
Yep.
I better hurry.
Right.
Yeah. Really. But I've been saying that for the last, 40 years. I better hurry.
Right.
He just won't go away.
And thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Yeah, for sure. I remember talking to Jack, a while back. We were sitting in his living room, and I said, we were talking about cowboy dressage, and he said, this is just the most fun, the Western dressage, and I've learned, I'm putting this together, and it's the most spectacular thing I've, discovered on horses is, figuring out how to use dressage in the Western thing to make them better Western horses. And he said, if I was just 20 years younger, this is all I do. And I thought, to be 72 again,
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Right.
Because he was 92 at the time.
Right.
Yeah, so it's all a matter of perspective. But I certainly, it's an odd answer to say who of present would you go ride with, and the guy I go ride with is 96. But who of the past would I go ride with? It would be, Tom or Ray again, for sure. I would do that. And it was, I would have to admit that I didn't learn as much about how to stop and spin from Tom and Ray.
Right.
That wasn't their deal. All right. What I learned was how horses think, how horses move, how horses respond, how you get that connection, and then I was able to turn those things into stop, spin, circle, change leads, and all that other stuff, but how a horse thinks, there's nobody out there really teaching that right now that can be taught in a way that, most people could go then apply it to whatever you want to do,
Right, exactly.
Even high level competitiveness. It seems like those people that are teaching that kind of connection with a horse, they're almost trying to talk you out of competitive stuff.
Yes, absolutely. They're kind of making it, and this is going to sound wrong, it's going to come off wrong, and I'm going to get the hate mail for it, but there's some of it that's sounding really fluffy.
Yeah.
It's all rainbows and unicorn farts, and and there's a lot of it that's just not real anyway.
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. We're just trying to turn them into our best friend, And there's nothing wrong with that. Shoot, I love horses.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
That's why
I love every single horse. That's exactly why we're into it, But yet I do understand that there are some fun things that you can do with a horse that will get you a buckle. And it's okay. That will win you $1 million, and it's okay.
Yep.
For sure. Tom and Ray never were down on competitiveness. In fact, even one of the colt start clinics I did with Ray, we were kind of talking about talent assess, even with just the first couple of sessions with a horse. And he said, okay, which one would you pick to go try to win a world championship on? And I said, I don't know. That one looks like it'd be pretty easy to train. He said, that one will never make it. I said, why? And he said, that one's too low on the pecking order. That one will give up before you get there.
Interesting.
Yeah. He said, and now if you were to go try to win a colt start competition and you get 3 days, pick that one.
Yep.
Pick that one.
Yep.
But if you're going to take a couple of years and that horse is going to need some Saturday night heart, and we know it's not going to be easy on Saturday night, you better pick that one over there.
Yep.
That one will make you work for it. Yeah, it'll be easy. He'll come up with a lot of wrong answers, and it won't. It's going to be hard.
Yep.
But on Saturday night, 2 years from now, 3 years from now,
yep,
he'll play.
Yep,
he'll play.
Absolutely. One of those more gamey horses. Yep.
Yeah, exactly right.
Very cool.
So those guys didn't try to discourage competitiveness,
right?
Even though they were natural horsemen.
Yes, exactly.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So let's see. That brings me into the big question that I love asking in these broadcasts. What is your personal definition of horsemanship?
Oh, well, my personal definition of horsemanship is, wow, nobody's ever asked me that question.
Yes.
Okay. So
sorry,
tune in next week. Tune in next week when I've come up with the answer. My personal definition. Okay, I'm going to do the Ray Hunt thing. I haven't figured that one out yet.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not a bad answer, though. That's not a bad answer.
I know. That's not a bad answer. But my personal definition of horsemanship is playing a fair game with a horse in a way that causes them to accomplish as much as possible. My personal definition also includes being able to, all right, here we go, where you can ride like you mean it. And that being an acronym, MEAN, M stands for maximize the gifts, E is eliminate the resistances, A is accept what the horse is at that point, and N is never quit trying.
Something tells me that's not the first time you've said that.
No, it's actually on my DVD.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I thought I remembered hearing it. I remember hearing that. Yeah, I've got to review those. It's been a little while since I've watched your DVD.
You got to watch it again.
Yes, I do.
But that actually is a pretty good definition.
Yeah,
ride like you mean it. Yeah, ride like you mean it.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Craig, how can folks find you and where you're going to be around the world?
Well, the best way is actually I'm trying to figure out social media. But good Lord, give me a break. I'm an old guy. So I need to find some grade school kid to help me with this.
Right.
But
right.
I do have a Facebook page, a business page that is Craig Johnson International, and on there I certainly do try to keep up with where I'm going and where I'm, what's coming up next. That's my favorite way, is the social media. So if you are curious about where I'm going and what I'm going, Craig Johnson International is the page. Awesome. I also have a personal page, Craig Johnson. Ask me, to be friends. I'm not ignoring you. It's full. But the business page, please like it, share it, and we do put a lot of tips on there. I also have a website called Craig Johnson International as well, CraigJohnsonInternational.com.
Perfect.
And it's a website that we are in the middle of recreating and redoing and finding somebody that is good at that as well. I have no technical skills, none whatsoever. I'm just amazed that you have this spectacular studio at your house, that you are, doing this amazing stuff.
This spectacular studio at the Country Inn in Suites.
I couldn't figure that out. I wouldn't know what button to push. So I'm just amazed by that.
Damn it, Craig, we said we weren't going to bring that up.
Oh, that's right. We
Oh,
weren't.
goodness, no. So for all of our listeners who are kind of lost in the inside joke now that Craig and I have, I joked before we went live that I hope no one ever sees the setup that I have for these broadcasts, because it is, as I think I referred to it, as redneck trailer park as it gets. I have actually a hotel menu wrapped around my phone for better acoustics, and it's sitting on a little $5 tripod stand here on the desk. So
That is creative.
yeah, so that's what we get. This whole broadcast is as shoestring as it gets. It is the cell phone. So if I can do that, Craig, surely you can figure out your website.
Surely. Surely I can. But anyway, whenever I do, or somebody else does, that'll be a great place of information, my website.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so now something that I do, I don't know if you've caught any of the broadcasts that I've done in the past, but for any of my almost daily live Q&A sessions that I do, and especially these audio broadcasts, we always ask a question of the day at the end. And the special guest is the one that gets to ask the question of the day. So this is basically you ask any of our listeners whatever you want to ask them, and they get to answer. So what is our question of the day?
Ooh, and I get to ask it.
You get to ask it, absolutely.
Why did you start riding?
I love it. Awesome. All right, gang, you've heard that. Why did you start riding? Craig Johnson wants to know. Give your answers in the comment section below this audio broadcast, or heck, send him a message on his Facebook page. That'd be a great idea too. Engage with him through social media. Craig, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. This has officially been our longest broadcast. We've been on solid for 2 hours now, my friend. This is kind of amazing.
Wow. It went so fast.
Absolutely it did. So this is just proof of what you and I talked about. We don't really have to have a schedule of things to talk about. It's just going to roll and flow.
It did.
So I love it. This was so much fun. Again, thank you, Craig. I look forward to hopefully chatting with you like this again in the future. And we've tried now, I think, for 2 years to put a clinic together, the two of us.
Right.
So hopefully,
and nobody shows up, so what the heck,
Yeah, absolutely, right?
But we will keep trying.
We will keep trying,
Yeah.
because if we can make talking over the phone this much fun for 2 hours, imagine the fun we could have in 2 or 3
Imagine
days.
people need to sit there on a horse and try to figure out what the heck we're going to do next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It'll be a blast. So,
We'll have
right.
fun.
Well, again, thank you for that, Craig. And gang, thank you so much again for tuning in. Again, whether you tuned in live or whether you're listening to the replay on Facebook or streaming from YouTube or iTunes, thank you so much for tuning in. Our next broadcast is going to be, of course, next Thursday, and I'm not sure what that date is or who we have lined up. I believe we might have Barbara Schulte lined up for next week's talk, so be sure to tune in again for that while we keep talking about horses. Thanks, gang.